Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans, for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Thursday, May 30th, 2024, and I'm very happy to be joined once again by fellow South Stands contributor, Paige Van Horn from Denver. PVH, how's it going, buddy?
Dude, my man. It's been way too long.
Way too long.
Since we've done a pod, and actually since we talked, but everything's going great, man. It's a pleasure to talk with you and looking forward to talking about some Buckeye football on this, pre-summer. What is it? May 28th
May 30th,
29th day. Yeah. I love it. Let's do it.
All right, buddy. Good to hear your voice. Now, we are just over 2 months away from the start of fall camp, which will begin, as it always does, in early August. Last year, fall camp started on August 3rd. And we're just about 3 months away from the season opener on August 31st against Akron. Did you see the line on that game, by the way?
Dude, the first 4 games, it's absurd.
The early line on the Akron game is Ohio State minus 50.5.
Yeah, I actually thought about that and gave it some, can you really lay 50 in the first game? I know nothing about Akron. Right?
Yeah, they're terrible. I think they won 2 games last year. But I, as a gambling man, would you take that? Would you?
I mean, I guess so. If now knowing that Akron has only won 2 games last year, I guess you do. But that line, actually, I was just chuckled to myself. And the next 3 games aren't much better.
No.
But especially 50. Yeah, I mean, you have to do it, but man, I don't feel comfortable doing it. That's for sure.
Yeah, because first of all, it's a season opener. They're still going to be working out some kinks, and then they're probably going to rest a lot of guys in the second half. But you're right to your point about the schedule: Akron, then Western Michigan, then there's a bye. They have an off week on the weekend of the 14th. Then on the 21st, Marshall comes to town. Then the Big Ten schedule starts at Michigan State. So Michigan State should be a little better than they've been recently, but those first 3 games, PU.
Yeah. Well, in my brain, I was thinking, you'd think normally they'd have Oregon, right? Their preseason test.
Right.
By the way, they're in the Big Ten. Again, so there's all these new things going on where you have to readjust everything that we thought about, college football or Ohio State football for the last 40 years is completely out the window. It's nuts.
I mean, you've got Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Washington all joining the conference this year. We've got a 12-team playoff, no more Big Ten divisions. Man, it is a brand new world in college football, and the Big Ten in particular. All right, buddy, let's jump right into it. Now, I did a complete recap of all the offseason personnel and coaching changes back on May 19th, so I'm not going to detail every single one of those transactions here today. But as we know, Ohio State managed to convince 11 draft-eligible Buckeyes to return for their senior seasons. You know who those players are: PVH, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Denzel Burke, Egbuka, Henderson, that crew. And the Buckeyes also added a half dozen high-impact players from the transfer portal in the winter, including superstar safety Caleb Downs, running back Quinshon Judkins, and quarterback Will Howard. They also added the country's top prep player and freshman phenom wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. Finally, new offensive coordinator and quarterback coach Chip Kelly headlines a slew of changes to the coaching staff that were, quite frankly, long overdue. At the same time, though, let's not forget that Ohio State did lose 25 players from the 2023 roster to the winter and spring transfer portal windows. Now, having said all that, PVH, I got a 2-part question for you. How would you grade the offseason for the Buckeyes? Give us an A through F grade of the offseason.
Is that a trick question?
No, not at all. There's no wrong answers here. And then the second piece to that question is, what would you consider the most impactful development or developments of the transactions here that I just mentioned?
Well, I didn't know that they had lost 23 guys. That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, 25.
Are they under the scholarship limit at this point?
I believe they still are, or if not, they're right at 85.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, dude. I mean, the guys that they brought in was astonishing. I mean, it was almost, what a contrast you have after the Missouri game, right? Man. Where it was like, man, the sky is falling. And that was just so painful. And then it seemed like we had just 2 months of just jaw-dropping news where you're like, no fucking way. That
Yeah.
just happened? Like, there's no way that guy's coming back. So to me, the biggest thing, clearly is, and again, it's a new world, but the fact that they convinced all those guys, to come back is, it's astonishing. And, I'm a firm and on record of always saying, man, if you're a first round, and actually if you're in the first 3 rounds, dude, go pro, right?
Yeah.
There's just too much at risk. You can get hurt. The money's too compelling. Like the one guy to me that was just, I absolutely couldn't believe he came back was Denzel Burke, right?
Yeah.
And maybe JTT too. Those were the two where you're like, really? You convinced those guys to come back? Maybe even Jordan Hancock, right? Because cornerback's so valued in the NFL.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. But when Burke came back, and I was just like, oh my God, there is definitely something different going on in Columbus. We all know what it is. And, I do think there is the element of, these guys would love to leave. They don't want to leave on the sour note of, never being in Michigan and things like that. Money always previously would have trumped that, but bad metaphor in a day when the Trump news is out. But I digress. It's to me, the fact that they got, I mean, they didn't lose anybody that was impactful that you thought, oh yeah, for sure that guy would go pro. I mean, there's not one person, right?
Except for Marvin Harrison Jr. Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah, Harrison Jr. Yep.
Yeah, he's
okay.
the only one. But I mean, no one expected him to come back, and he's one who absolutely had to go. Right? What was he taken, 3rd or 4th in the draft? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking $40 million. There's no collective out there yet that can match that. Although, like Denzel Burke don't you think he would have been a late first round draft pick?
I think so. I think he projects as that this year. I'd have to go back and look at what the cornerback crop was like for the 2024 draft, but
yeah, I mean anything in the first round. So just the fact, and then you sprinkle in the guys that they got in the portal.
Oh my God,
was just not, and then not now just sort of the excitement and expectation coming off again. The contrast to, coming off the Missouri game was unlike anything I've ever seen. Obviously, we're in a new world of college football, but that was unprecedented. It was phenomenal, and it turned that frown upside down, as Mr. Sloan would have loved to have said. Yeah.
So, what's your grade for the off season?
Oh, dude, I mean, if it's not A++, I don't. I don't know how. I like, what could you quibble with?
What could you have done better? Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to really nitpick, they failed to grab a starter caliber offensive tackle out of the portal as you and I thought they might. But I mean, they addressed every other need and upgraded, I would say, in most cases through the portal. And I'm with you, man. The offseason was looking pretty bleak there for a few weeks in December and early January. I mean, McCord, Fleming, and Trainum all announced their intentions to transfer before the bowl game. And then, the bowl game was an embarrassment. I mean, the defense played well, but offensively, they did not show up. And then, as you said, the good news just started pouring in. And every time I refreshed my Twitter feed, it seemed like, oh my God, they're getting a commitment from another star player to come back. Or, oh my God, they just landed this guy out of the transfer portal. So yeah, I think this is the best offseason, most successful offseason they've had in our lifetimes. I can't imagine it going better for them.
No. Well, and it was sort of the convergence of the perfect storm, but it really speaks to the power of Nick Saban and how he, Caleb Downs was, I mean, I think he was probably, if you read the reports, it was coming down to us and Alabama and the Saban sort of gravity pull was, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
These guys would just think, even if it was like 55-45, hey, I want to, go to Ohio State, but yet I got Nick Saban there. Like, okay, it's like playing for John Wooden.
Yeah.
And how big of a factor was Saban retiring? That we get Downs, we get the offensive lineman, I forget his name off the top of my head, but that was a seismic shift also that happened
Yeah.
right? In the offseason that nobody saw coming.
Nobody saw coming.
That, oh my God, benefited Ohio State probably more than any program in the country, I would think.
Huge. And, I'm not sure Ohio State would have seized that opportunity in the way that they did this offseason in previous off seasons. And I'd said on several of the previous pods that I did, like back in January, that we're seeing the full weight, for the first time, the full weight of Ohio State NIL behind the program. And I think they're also really truly embracing the transfer portal in a way perhaps they hadn't done before. I mean, building your roster now can't just be about, recruiting and developing prep players. The transfer portal has to be a part of your talent acquisition strategy. So I think we saw the convergence of those two things. The thing I loved about several of these acquisitions is they didn't just fill a hole. They filled a hole and allowed another important piece to move into an area where there was another need. I'll just give you an example. So Caleb Downs coming in. First of all, he was the number 1 rated player in the transfer portal. He comes in and will now replace Josh Proctor, who actually played pretty well last year at the adjuster safety. And Downs can actually play all 3 safety spots. That's what he did at Bama. He actually split his time between all 3 safety spots. But what the addition of Downs allowed was for Jim Knowles to move Sonny Styles to linebacker. And what that did is make that room more athletic and added more playmaking and more upside to the linebacker room. And I think there was a real need for that. So it was really kind of like a 2-for-1 upgrade for the defense. They got a better player at adjuster safety than what they had last year. And it allowed another really, really good player to move to an area where there was a need. And that was Styles going to linebacker. I think you could say the same thing about adding Seth McLaughlin, who'll be their starting center, also from Alabama. McLaughlin's acquisition allows Carson Hinsman, who really struggled at center, but he's a natural guard. So that allows Hinsman to potentially move over to guard where he's more comfortable, and I think he'll make a bigger impact. So that's what I loved about some of these player acquisitions. They were like 2-for-1 upgrades because they were allowed to move some other important pieces around the chessboard. And then I got to say, sorry, go ahead, PBH.
No, finish your thought.
I was gonna move to a coaching move. Why don't you finish your thought, and then I'll move to my one other thought.
Well, in a position where there's only one ball, and they go out and get Junkins from Mississippi.
Oh yeah,
and
huge.
And, I take him at his word, right? Like Day, said he called Travion and it's like, hey, this might happen. How do you feel about it? And he was another guy that was on the bubble that could, definitely go pro as a running back. He probably absolutely should. I don't know where he would have gotten drafted. But you bring it okay, so he decides to stay, and then you go get Junkins? My God, that's just, so it's a little bit different than what you just described. However, I mean, to have 2 guys like that, it's astonishing. I never would have seen that coming. No way.
Yeah, Judkins is he was a luxury item for them this year, I think, right? To be able to add him, to pair him with Travion Henderson. But people keep saying this. If Ohio State is going to make the deep postseason run that we expect them to make, they're going to play upwards of 15, 16 games. So you have to have depth. And, with Henderson's injury history, maybe Ohio State fans can breathe a little easier now going into the season, knowing that if something does happen to Henderson, you have Judkins there to step in. The one move I got to say I'm pretty pumped about, PVH, and it's taken me a while to kind of really come to Jesus on this one. It's simmered for a while. I'm pretty pumped about Chip Kelly as offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. I mean, Ryan Day finally has that other adult in the room who's going to help him make better decisions in high leverage moments in Ohio State's biggest games. Moments like the end of the second quarter against Michigan last year, I think are going to look very different with Kelly on the sidelines and calling the plays. The other thing about Kelly is he's revered as a run game specialist. I mean, everywhere he's been at the college level, his running games have been elite. Oregon led the Pac-12 in rushing offense during all 4 of Kelly's seasons there as head coach. And for the last 2 seasons, UCLA led the Pac-12 in rushing offense when Kelly was there. And look, I mean, let's face it, the Ohio State running game has not been quite right since probably 2019 when J.K. Dobbins ran for 2,000 yards. So I think there's good reason to believe Kelly is going to fix that. And the one thing they say about Kelly is he's never had elite offensive lines where he's been. He's able to scheme up an elite running game with whatever he's got in the kitchen from an offensive line perspective. So that's great news, I think, for the Ohio State offense. And no more punting in plus territory on fourth and
Right.
short in big games, right?
Yeah, I mean the whole Chip Kelly thing was another. My friend Brad, like, text, he's like, that's just like laughable. Talk about the rich getting richer, right? Like, you lose O'Brien and then you get Kelly, and you're like, wait, like what? Like, how is that, like, even possible? Because I remember when that was the rumor, and I was like, that can't be true,
Yeah.
right? And God knows what was going on at UCLA that he wanted out that bad. But maybe you take him at his word, right? Like, at this stage of his coaching career, he just wants to coach offense.
Just wants to coach
Clearly
offense.
doesn't need the money.
Yeah.
And do all the headache stuff as being a head coach. But I mean, again, that is the quintessential, the rich get richer. And you just kind of, like, if you're everybody else in the country, you're just like, give me an effing break with that, dude, right? Because I think you're right. Like, I mean, that is gigantic. You got a guy there, right, that can tell Day, he's not going to be a yes man at all, right? Like, I've been there, done that, right? He's going to give him, the harsh truth when it's going, maybe poorly or things need to be shook up. And
Yeah.
obviously he's a very, very creative offensive mind. Yeah, I mean, it's like funny. Like, I kind of even forgot about that, right? Like,
It's crazy.
You just got Chip Kelly
as
your offensive coordinator.
Yeah, when I watched the spring game, it really kind of dawned on me that there he was, and I think you're right. That's kind of the word around the campfire, is that Kelly just really didn't have the stomach to be a head coach in today's college football with NIL, transfer portal, and he just wanted to coach ball. And I think that's what he said when Joel Klatt interviewed him in the spring game, that he just put me in the lab and let me come up with a game plan. And actually, that's what Ryan Day, I think, has really needed these last couple of years. And Andy Staples pointed this out in one of his pods a couple of months ago, that what was missing from Ohio State offensively was they didn't really have any bespoke game plans, right? The offense just kind of looked the way that it looked against everybody. And that's not going to be the case with Kelly. I mean, this guy can scheme up an offense and scheme up opponents. And then, we know what he can do as a master play caller on the sideline. So I'm really, really excited about that. And it's taken me a couple months to really get there. Maybe just seeing him on the sidelines in the spring game is what really got me excited.
Well, but to that point, it'll be interesting for Day, right? Like, will he miss being the guy, the offensive coordinator, play caller, versus the CEO, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's actually absolutely they're swapping roles.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously Day has ambitions, and they want to climb that head coaching mountain tree like Kelly did, right, going to the Eagles and stuff like that. But that's a big adjustment for Day, and it'd be, how does he, feel about it? 6 games into the season. It's because it is completely different than what he was doing previously. I think it absolutely is a great move. That doesn't mean he necessarily is going to like it, though. Yeah.
Yeah. Part of me wonders if it was kind of not entirely his choice and that maybe there were some more influential figures in and around the Ohio State program that basically told Day, like, look, you have to do this.
Right. Well, and hopefully that is the case.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's why Gene Smith and the other guy that's coming in from Texas, I mean, that's their job, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you look at the model now, that's the model, right? I mean, look, Kirby Smart's the CEO. Nick Saban was the CEO type for many years during his run. That's just kind of the way that you win now in today's college football. So it is crazy. I mean, there were 3 major coaching moves outside of Columbus that had a pretty big impact on Ohio State's fortunes in 2025. You just mentioned it. Saban's retirement allowed Ohio State to nab 3 of Alabama's best players, including Caleb Downs. Then you have Jim Harbaugh retiring, right? That is going to affect Ohio State's fortunes, we think, in the Big Ten schedule. And then you have Chip Kelly deciding, you know what? I'm tired of being a head coach. I just want to coach ball. And, what were the odds? What are the odds that another head coach of his caliber, as successful as he is, as accomplished as he was, just decides, hey, I want to come be your coordinator? So,
well, that's a phenomenal point. Like, and I hadn't thought of it. The 3 biggest coaching, changes all directly had a material impact on Ohio State.
Huge.
Directly and indirectly. Huge impact.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. We got old Jimmy went off to the NFL. That Kelly and then Saban.
What are the chances that happens again in a single off season, right? But
no, never.
But Ohio State pounced on it, right? You give them credit, right? They took full advantage, and it remains to be seen whether they'll take full advantage of Harbaugh leaving Michigan. We'll find out in late November. But with Saban's departure and Kelly deciding, hey, I no longer want to be a head coach, Ohio State pounced on that opportunity, and they're a much better program for it.
Yeah.
PVH, anything else you want to say about the off season before we move on?
No, I think we kind of covered it, but yeah, it was eventful to say the least.
To say the least. Okay, so I think we've established that the 2024 roster, the 2024 Buckeyes are loaded for bear, and we're already starting to see the Buckeyes at or very near the top of some early preseason top 25s. I should say from early credible preseason top 25s. Fox's Joel Klatt, On3's Andy Staples, the Athletics' Ari Wasserman, all have Ohio State number one in their post-spring top 25s. Those are three guys that I listen to when it comes to college football. Yep. And we've seen a bunch of others that have Ohio State number two behind Georgia. I mean, most of the experts will tell you it's Ohio State or Georgia in some order. They're kind of in a class by themselves. So I think the 2024 Buckeyes are a lock to be number one or number two in the first AP poll, which is going to be released in mid-August. And that had me thinking, PBH. How many Buckeye football teams in the modern era were ranked in the top two of the preseason AP poll? And how do the 2024 Buckeyes stack up to those teams? So, as I like to do, I did a little research. First, let me define the modern era for this exercise, the modern era of Buckeye football. It's from the John Cooper regime and forward. That's my loose definition of the modern era. Now, since the Cooper...
and by the way, I can't go back much further than that.
Yeah,
so you do that for my own benefit. Anything beyond that, you're like, I can't remember. I just can't remember.
Well, I'm here to help you fill in the blanks, my friend, so don't worry.
Love it.
So since the Cooper regime began, which was in 1988, only 10 Ohio State teams have been ranked in the top two of the preseason AP poll. Only 10. We're talking about 35 seasons of football that have been played since 1988. Only 10 of those 35 Ohio State teams have been ranked in the top two of the preseason AP poll. Now, John Cooper had one of them. He only had one. That was 1998. Jim Tressel had four, 2003, 2006, 2008, and 2010. Urban Meyer had three, 2013, 2015, 2017. Ryan Day so far has only had two, 2020 and 2022. Now, of those 10 teams, only three of them, PVH, were preseason number one in the AP poll, 1998, 2006, and 2015. So that would probably come as a surprise to a lot of Buckeye fans that only three teams since 1988 have been a preseason number one according to the AP poll. So in our limited time here, my friend, 10 teams are entirely too much to talk about. So I think we need to pare down that list just a little bit. With hindsight, I think we can say that four of those 10 teams I just mentioned weren't really national title material. They probably got their preseason number one or number two ranking on reputation. They were very good, but they were not great. And those teams were 2003, 2008, 2013, and 2017. 03, 08, and 2017, I just don't think they were good enough at quarterback. I don't think they were good enough offensively. And the 2013 team just wasn't good enough on defense. They had a lot of good players on that defense, Ryan Shazier, Bradley Roby, Noah Spence, Joey Bosa, but the scheme was awful, and it had a fatal flaw on the back end that eventually caught up to them late in that season. So the other thing about these four teams, all four of them lost multiple games, including a couple in embarrassing fashion. For example, the 2008 team lost 35-3 to USC. We were just talking about that game. You were at that game.
Yeah, I was at that game.
You took an L that day on several different levels, I believe.
Yeah, we don't need to get into it, but yes, that was a tough afternoon.
That was a bad afternoon, yeah. And then the 2017 team is another one that comes to mind, another bad loss that comes to mind. They lost by 31 points to an unranked Iowa team. So I'm going to chuck all four of these teams out of this discussion just for the sake of time, and I also don't believe they really belong there. Now, I will say, though, before we move on, some fans may take issue with me leaving the 2003 team out of this discussion because they won a title the year before, and that team set the record at the time for the most NFL draft picks in a single draft at 14. That's still the Ohio State school record, but Georgia broke that record a couple years ago in 2022.
Well, you know what's interesting about that, though? I was thinking about this, the 2003 team. The biggest thing that I remember, though, was the Claret saga.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
Which, completely derailed that team. And yeah, you're right about the quarterback was crunch. But how different, because to make this comparison, right?
Totally.
The 2003 team versus the 20. Collette was basically trying to do what we're doing today. He
That's
was just
right.
21 years early. And the drama and all the BS that went along with that just absolutely, it overwhelmed that team, I feel like.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's just ironic that now, if you compare it to what happened this last offseason, I mean, come on, the irony there is just dripping off the trees.
Totally. No, and it is interesting talking about this team. Yeah, I mean, he was their best offensive player. Things might have been very different. They played a lot of close games that year, but they did lose to Wisconsin and Michigan during the regular season. And you probably don't remember this, but man, they were life and death to beat San Diego State and Bowling Green that year. They only beat San Diego State by 3 points. It was like 16-13 or something. It was one of those September stinkers. And I think Dorsey was just going nuts when that game was happening. And then they needed triple overtime to beat NC State. They played a lot of close games. I think they eked by Penn State by 1 point. They were very good, clearly very talented if you have 14 kids being drafted off that team. But I wouldn't put them at national championship caliber, so I think that's why I'm taking them out of this discussion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just, the Claret thing is what I remember most about it. And just like, oh my God, this is just a saga that just would not die.
Oh yeah. I mean, if NIL had existed back then and it was okay for these guys to take money and make money off their name, image, and likeness, it might have been a very different season for that team. They might have had a chance to repeat. Okay, so we've eliminated those 4, and that leaves us with 6 Buckeye teams that I think are much more suitable comparisons to this year's squad, both in terms of personnel, expectations, and that sort of thing. So why don't we start with the 3 that were ranked number 1 in the preseason AP poll? That was the 1998 team, 2006, and 2015. So to remind our listeners and to refresh everybody's memory, the 1998 team, they were a consensus. They weren't consensus, but they were preseason AP number 1. They had 31st place votes. Folks will remember Andy Katzenmoyer was on the cover of SI's college football preview issue that year. That team had Joe Germain, David Boston, D. Miller, Antoine Winfield, Ahmed Plummer, Gary Berry, Niall Diggs, Damon Moore. They finished 11-1 and number 2 in the final AP poll. Their only loss was that inexplicable home stinker to a mediocre Michigan State team in the Horseshoe. But that was otherwise, a team that was very deserving of that preseason number 1 ranking. And man, if there were a 12-team playoff then, that team would have been a shoo-in, and I think they get in, they win. They were the best team in college football that year, in my opinion. Anything about that team, PVH, I'm leaving out that you remember?
2 things. Well, number 1, distinctly, Sloaner and I were at Bayside. It was a night game, right?
I think it was a late afternoon game, but yeah.
So, late afternoon game. It'd be interesting to know what the line in that game was because I don't think we even thought it would be a game. And I just remember playing pool in the back of Bayside, and we're like, holy shit, this is now a game. And holy shit, they lost that game. The other thing, though, is wasn't that the year that they were platooning with Stanley Jackson? Or was it was Jermaine in control?
That was the 1 year that Jermaine was the lone starter. It was the 2 previous seasons, 96 and 97, where they were platooning the 2, which I absolutely hated.
All right, well, that takes the steam out of my argument. That's the one parallel that I could think about this year's team, right? Because we're going to get there. That is, to me, the singular question. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, of course, I was wrong. Jackson was already gone. But that kind of killed him the year before. Like, well, and, the debate, can you platoon quarterbacks? I don't know. But, okay.
Okay, good. Well, I have a lot more to say about the 98 team in comparison to this year's team because for some reason that one catches my eye out of the remaining 6 here we're talking about. So the next team chronologically was the 2006 Ohio State team that was a pretty decisive preseason number 1 in the AP poll, 35 first place votes. And that team had Troy Smith, who, as we remember, won the Heisman Trophy. Ted Ginn Jr., Anthony Gonzalez, James Laurinaitis, and Malcolm Jenkins were the core of that team. Now, they almost went wire to wire as the number one team. Their only loss was in the national title game to Florida. That squad finished 12-1 and number 2 in the final AP poll. They got blown out by Florida. It was pretty ugly. Anything I've left out about the 2006 team you want to mention, PBH?
Well, it's the second game I was at with Mr. Barnes. Wasn't very happy afternoon. I think we were in the parking lot drinking, I don't know, something by the third quarter. Did not see that coming.
No, nobody did. Oh man.
Man, that's the worst one of all. But yeah, I mean that team was loaded.
Right.
Man, and the Ohio State Michigan game, I think that was a night game.
That
game as well? God, that was phenomenal. It was back and forth.
Number one versus number two.
Yeah.
Bo Schembechler had just died earlier in the week, and to add more to that game, that was a dream season until it wasn't, and then it was an absolute nightmare.
Right.
2006,
absolute effing nightmare in Glendale. And I'm in Glendale, can't even get out of that shit town. Like, I'm not even in downtown Phoenix. I'm stuck drinking Coors Light in the parking lot of Glendale while Ohio State's getting their ass kicked. And it started off so well with Teddy Ginn running the kickoff back.
Yeah. Oh man, that was a really, really good team, and I think mostly deserving of that preseason number one. And they almost did it. They went wire to wire during the regular season. And, I remember there was no Big Ten title game at that time, and Ohio State had a stupid long layoff. I think it was almost 7 weeks from the Michigan game to the national title game. I think the layoff, definitely had an impact, but that Florida team was pretty ferocious. That was Urban Meyer, and boy, that really disappointing finish to an otherwise
Isn't
great
that one
year.
of your roles, the Heisman Trophy tour or something like that?
The banquet tour, because Troy Smith looked like he was a good 20 pounds heavier from in that game than he was from the end of the Michigan game, for sure. The next team, 2015. Now, this was had all we thought the makings of a very special season. Ohio State was a unanimous preseason number one in the AP poll. They got all 61 first place votes. They were coming off the 2014 national title with the group of super sophomores. A lot of great players on that team. Zeke Elliott, Joey Bosa, Michael Thomas, Taylor Decker, Curtis Samuel, Jalen Marshall, Eli Apple, Vaughn Bell, Raekwon McMillan, JT Barrett, Cardale Jones. That team finished 12-1 and number 4 in the final AP poll. The only loss was at home in the wind and the rain to Michigan State. It's the second time Michigan State foils our national championship season. That team was absolutely loaded and had every reason to be a preseason number one, but never really played like a number one team until it was too late. After they lost to Michigan State, they boat raced Michigan the next week, and then they killed Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, but it was too little, too late. Anything I'm leaving out about that season, PVH 2015?
No, that one. But again, pick a quarterback, right? I mean, Cardale Jones coming back, right? So we had Cardale, JT, and who's the third one I'm forgetting?
Well, Braxton Miller was back, but as a wide receiver.
Oh, Miller.
Yeah.
So,
I forgot to mention him. No, they fucked up the quarterback. They completely mishandled the quarterback situation. You could argue that
it was a disaster.
That's what they.
He didn't even announce it until the start of the first game, right?
Yeah. No, it literally nobody knew who the starter was until I think they were in the locker room minutes before kickoff. It was very strange.
Yeah. It'd be interesting if you gave Herb some truth serum, right? How he would actually talk about that and how he handled it. And then you could also make the argument that was maybe that was sort of like the slide downward. Right?
I think so.
In his coaching prowess, right? Because at that point he was destined for coaching Mount Rushmore, and no, it didn't happen that way. No,
I agree. That entire team, from players all the way up to the top of the coaching staff, just had a championship hangover and just did not play like a number one for most of the season. But
they totally had a hangover that whole season.
Yeah, totally. Sure. I mean, I think a lot of the draft eligible guys seem to be kind of going through the motions, and
right.
Yeah. Okay. So the next team in line. So these next three were preseason number 2, and I think, but very worthy of these preseason number 2 rankings, and teams that could have won a national championship maybe in a different year. 2010, Ohio State was a preseason number 2 in the AP poll with a large group of returning stars from a team that went 11-2 and won the Big Ten the year before. Terrell Pryor, Boom Herron, DeVere Posey, Dane Sanzenbacher, Cam Hayward, Mike Adams, Ross Homan, Brian Rold. Now this PVH was the infamous Tattoo Gate team that finished 12-1, number 5 in the AP poll. Their only loss that season was on the road at night to J.J. Watt's Wisconsin team. In a 12-team playoff, even in a 4-team playoff, but in a 12-team playoff, I think this team would have done some damage if it existed back then. Anything I'm leaving out about the 2010 team?
No, again, in a different world, right? You're not doing. I mean, how dumb does it feel now to the Tattoo Gate derail that whole season?
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's and then the cover of SI with Trussell.
Yeah, how
deep did it
go?
How deep
did it go?
Yeah, it went like maybe an inch deep. You effing, again, just piling on. It was just, I mean, it is funny in hindsight looking back at these things. Like, oh my god, and.
It's
terrible.
ridiculous.
Just
and these guys were treated
terrible.
like criminals for trading signed memorabilia for free tattoos. That was the crime.
Right.
And really what that did is derail the following season, right? I mean, it sent Tressel packing. But, I mean, Terrell Pryor, Boom Herron, DeVere Posey, Mike Adams, those guys were all coming back for another run at a title, and that was all derailed, and we know the rest is history.
Yeah. And the other thing to this day, like I always, man, like Trussell, if you get an email and in the email somebody, references the FBI, like just throw your computer in the ocean.
Just tender your resignation right there.
Well, or just don't hit reply.
Yeah, right.
And run into Gene Smith's office and be like, okay, Houston, we have a problem. But, a lot of times it wasn't the crime, although it was portrayed that way. It was the cover-up that ultimately killed him.
Yeah.
But I think he actually hit reply. And it's like, dude, you just don't do that. It's sad too, and it like bums me out because like, man, that man's reputation was just so ridiculously tarnished on just the most stupid ass thing in the history. Like, I'm sure he's probably made peace. Maybe he hasn't, but it actually still galls me to this day.
And it wasn't that long ago. It was ridiculous. And that team was loaded and very worthy of a preseason number 2 ranking. And I think, like I said, would have done some real damage if there was more of an expanded, postseason field that they could have participated in.
And if he thought he had a 6-6 squad, he probably would have done what I just described.
Right.
But he knew what he had on his hands. He's like, okay, I got to take a shot at this. But man, just I don't know. God,
what could have been with that team?
Yeah, what could have been?
Players.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, next team in line, 2020. Ohio State was a preseason number 2 with 21 first place votes. And, they were coming off the 2019 season, that dominant season, and the heartbreaking loss in the CFP semis to Clemson. That was my hellish moment in the parking lot in Glendale, right? I mean, that was the game. God. Oh, God, it was just so heartbreaking. But a lot of key players coming back from that team for 2020. Justin Fields, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jeremy Ruckert, Pete Warner, Sean Wade, Baron Browning, Trey Sermon. Sadly, that season was cut short by COVID, but the Buckeyes finished 7-1, Big Ten champs for the 4th straight year, and they did get their revenge on Clemson in the CFP semis. So that was what made the whole thing at least worth it in part. But they ended up losing to Bama in the national championship game and finished number 2 in the final AP poll. Ohio State, it's worth mentioning, they were missing some key personnel for that title game, but magically Bama was completely unaffected by COVID. But that was an excellent football team that I thought was certainly worthy of the preseason number 2 ranking, and in a different season might have been a different story. They might have won the whole thing, but that Bama team was pretty loaded. Is there anything I'm missing about that 2020 season, that 2020 team, PVH?
Who was the Caucasian linebacker that was trying to guard?
Tough Borland.
old tough Borland.
Yeah,
that's what I just remember. Like, he's on, and who's the wide receiver? I can't even remember his name for Alabama.
Yeah. Oh God, he won the Heisman. Why am I blanking on it? But
I thought you just said his. Anyways, I just remember that in that game. He's like, that's probably not a good defensive scheme if you have Tough Borland trying to guard that guy.
Yeah, that
right.
was.
And he just absolutely freaking torched us, which again, right, was part and parcel of those horrific defenses that we had that just derailed Ohio State. If we just put a competent defense on that team, we
Yeah.
might have had a puncher's chance. But that Alabama team was absolutely loaded.
Yep.
But they just thought it was just painful to watch in the national championship.
It was painful. And, Justin Fields was pretty beat up, right? He took that gnarly hit against Clemson and wasn't quite himself. They ended up losing Trey Sermon on, I think, the second or third play from scrimmage. And Sermon was a huge part of their postseason run. He caught fire at the end of that year. So a couple of bad breaks for the Buckeyes. And then, of course, COVID just kind of hung over that whole season. Finally, 2022. Ohio State was a preseason number 2, only 6 first place votes for that team. So they were a pretty kind of a distant second. Now that was only 2 years ago, so our memory is pretty fresh of that team. That was CJ Stroud's final year with the program. Now injuries were a huge factor that season. Jackson Smith and Jigba goes down with the injury in the season opener against Notre Dame. He only caught 5 passes that season. Trey Henderson also limited by injury, only 107 carries for Henderson. Then, of course, there was the shocking second half collapse against Michigan. We were looking at that in a different light now, though, with the whole sign stealing scandal and how that might have affected what happened in the second half of that game. But the Buckeyes make the CFP anyway. They come within a point of beating eventual national champion Georgia. That field goal goes in as time expires. I think we might be talking about an Ohio State national championship, but it didn't. The Buckeyes finish 11-2 and number 4 in the final AP rankings. Anything I'm leaving out about the 2022 team, PBH?
No, it's hard to just. That field goal, man, that was tough. I thought CJ was going to pull it out, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, that team bounced back hugely. And absolutely loaded, but man, I mean, and Georgia was a juggernaut, right? They gave that team everything they wanted, and man, that was so close.
Yeah. I mean, you said it about the 2020 team, but I think it applies especially here with 2022. I think some better personnel on defense and maybe a little bit better situational awareness by Jim Knowles, in terms of leaving guys on islands and blitzing and leaving his defense exposed. But also there were some deficiencies there on that defense, especially in the secondary. But man, they came close. They almost had enough just on offense alone to win a national title. Yeah.
100%.
All right, buddy.
We could talk about the horrible non-call or targeting call, but we don't want to relitigate that. It's going to make me angry all over.
So those are 6 teams that I want to talk about in comparison to the 2024 team. Ohio State, it's very rare. Only once every 8 or 9 years do you have. Well, first of all, expectations at Ohio State are always high, always through the roof. But every 7 or 8 years or so, there's one team that's a level up from the usual expectations. And we've just talked about 6 of them since the 1988 season. I think those 6 teams represented teams that were truly worthy of a number 1 or number 2 ranking and had the ingredients, had what it took to win a national championship, but fell just short. And I think these are worthy comparisons to the 2024 season. So, PBH, I'm going to kick this over to you. How would you compare the 2024 Buckeyes to those 6 squads? And feel free to take this from any angle that you want. If you want to talk about talent comparison, you want to talk about unfinished business, any angle that you feel you want to come at from this question.
I would say actually, to me, this might eclipse all of them. I mean, I think every Buckeye fan out there feels like, man, this is it. This is the year. This is, there are high expectations, and you got to have some luck to win a national championship.
For sure.
Stuff's going to happen. But, man, we've said it before. Man, this is probably national championship or bust. And the other thing is, it just really feels like it's a 2-horse race at this point.
Yeah.
But now you also have to factor in you're going to have this playoff, right? Which is totally different. There's not going to be a Big Ten game. And you have all these new teams in the Big Ten. And I would have expected, honestly, it'd be an interesting sort of poll question. What is this, Day's 5th year?
Sixth, I
For
believe.
him not that
Yeah.
sixth year, for him to not have a national championship at this point, not that I'm not saying his job's in jeopardy whatsoever. No, I think he's doing a fabulous job. But man, this is your shot, dude. This
Yeah.
is absolutely your shot. Has it, compares to those other teams in the past? I would probably, if you put a gun to my head, although it's a totally different makeup, the 2015 team, even though Ohio State didn't win a national championship last year, this team is loaded with just. I mean, how many of these guys are?
Yeah.
The whole freaking team is going to get drafted next year.
Yeah.
So what is it? So what else do you need to pull it off? Right in a normal, pre-12 team playoff. This has us and Georgia on a collision course, but we don't know what's going to happen, in the playoffs because, it's going to be, to your point earlier, it's going to be a long ass season.
Yeah.
Stuff's going to happen. But it certainly feels to me like there's just Ohio State and Georgia, everybody else, they're on a collision course. And so I can't remember being, my expectations being lower, than for what this team hopefully is going to pull off this year than probably in the last 12.
Yeah, you went where I was going to go. I mean, right off the bat, the immediate comparison that I make is to the 2015 teams in terms of overall talent. And I would say the 2024 team is close, is probably second only to the 2015 team of the six that we've just talked about in terms of talent. I think the 2015 team was probably the most talented of the six we just mentioned. I think it's probably slightly more talented than 2024. But if you look back at 2015, that team had already won a title with a core of mostly sophomores. That group showed us it could reach the mountaintop as second-year players. Then they all come back as juniors. I mean, I don't think the expectations could have been any higher than they were for that team. I think that roster had just slightly more talent than 2024. I mean, the 12 players were drafted off that team, including 5 in the first round. Bosa, Elliott, Apple, Decker, and Lee were all taken in the first round. And then they had 2 more in the second round, Michael Thomas and Von Bell. But it's damn close, to your point. The 2024 team is probably going to come close to that number of NFL draftees. It might break the school record of 14 set by the 2003 team. We'll see. But I think what's different for me about 2024 compared to 2015 is it's probably more mature. It's certainly more experienced, and I think it's a more mature team because we're talking about a very large group of seniors that are the core of that team. That's one big differentiator. And then the other differentiator between 2024 and 2015 is unfinished business. 3 straight losses to Michigan. You haven't won the Big Ten title since 2020. And I think in that regard, that's where the 2024 team for me is very similar to 1998. Both those teams coming off 3 straight losses to Michigan. It was the same deal for 1998. They had just lost 3 in a row. Heartbreakers, 95, 96, and 97 to Michigan that ruined their national title hopes. Same deal for 2024, man, coming off 3 straight losses to Michigan. Ohio State was number 2 in the college football playoff rankings going into the Michigan game. Each of the last 3 years, they lost all 3 games. So I think from that perspective, 2024 and 1998 also compare pretty favorably in terms of unfinished business. One last comparison I'll make between 2024 and 98, the secondaries. That 1998 secondary might have been the best secondary we've ever seen at Ohio State. Antoine Winfield, Gary Berry, Ahmed Plummer, those guys. This Ohio State secondary might be its equal, if not better. So those are the 2 obvious comparisons in my mind to teams of recent past that were, that had the expectations that this team does. What else do you see?
The other thing that's not necessarily a positive, but who's the quarterback on those teams?
Great. So let's talk about that. Where does the 2024 team rate in terms of quarterback play to the 6 that we've mentioned? If we think it's going to be Will Howard, is Howard a better quarterback than Joe Germain, do you think? Who would you give the edge to?
I mean, dude, I couldn't honestly say. I don't know that I honestly ever seen the guy throw a football.
Yeah.
So I love Joe Germain. I mean, I think, it was a different era,
right?
But man, the guy,
and they're different quarterbacks too,
and different quarterbacks. But I just remember even versus Stanley Jackson, that guy is a stud,
right?
He, puts the ball. But Joe Germain compared to CJ Stroud. No way. But
Yeah.
who knows? I mean, that's the question, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's two, which was
Well, let's go
a
down.
weird thing.
Let's keep going down the list. Okay, so we're not sure about Joe Germain and Will Howard. We're not sure about that comparison. I mean, Joe Germain is one of a handful of Ohio State quarterbacks that have thrown for over 3,000 yards in a season. They're different quarterbacks. Germain's a pro style, and Will Howard's more of a dual threat. 2006, we can't say. I mean, Troy Smith was the better quarterback over Will Howard. He won the Heisman Trophy. 2015.
Absolutely.
2015, you had the JT Barrett, Cardale Jones mishmash. Barrett eventually comes out on top. I don't know. You might be able to make an argument that Howard is a better quarterback than JT Barrett, but who knows? You might still give the edge to the 2015 team in that area. 2010, Terrell Pryor versus Howard. Who was the better quarterback? Some would argue Pryor was probably better. And then 2020 and 2019, during 2022, no way. I mean, Howard wasn't a better quarterback than Justin Fields. He's certainly not a better quarterback than C.J. Stroud. So,
no shot. No,
yeah. So
no.
you might say, you could argue that the 2024 team in terms of quarterback play is not as good as these six teams. So that might be an area, if we're talking about their title hopes getting derailed, maybe not quite good enough quarterback play compared to these six teams. I don't know. What do you think?
It's TBD. It's the singular question going into this season, along with the offensive line. I mean, there's incoming guys. There's like this guy Van Sickle that's coming in. Like, man, the stuff I'm hearing about him, like he could be a starter by the mid third or fourth game. Just saying. And this is the ultimate question mark. And what's the same and different about the 2015 team is I don't think people thought that Cardale would come back.
Yeah.
He ended up coming back, and it just derailed that whole thing. And so another one of our rules, right? If you've got three quarterbacks and you're not sure which one is your quarterback, do you have any quarterbacks? And then the quarterback room at Ohio State is a whole nother pod, right? We're not even going to go there, right?
Yeah.
We could talk about it for an hour. It makes no sense to me that some of these guys stuck around.
Yeah.
But, Howard is the X factor of Ohio State. Not, clearly they're making the playoff. Clearly they're going to be in the fold. Is he going to be good enough if he ultimately turns out to be the quarterback to win a national championship? And the comparison that I kind of been thinking about a little bit is Stetson Bennett from Georgia.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If we could get 3/4 of that, then we're golden. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah. Georgia won back-to-back national titles with a guy that, not C.J. Stroud, clearly, right, is an NFL prospect. And maybe you don't need to be elite at quarterback play. And look, Ohio State has had elite quarterback play these last, 4 or 5 years, and it's not been good enough. Going all the way back to, Dwayne Haskins in 2018, they didn't even qualify for the playoff. And then, you had Justin Fields, great quarterback, another first-round pick who wasn't quite good enough to get them over the top. Although I guess we could say that it wasn't his fault that they didn't win. They had deficiencies in other areas. And then C.J. Stroud, as great as he was, and as great as he was against Georgia, wasn't enough to get them over the top to win a national championship. So, maybe you don't need elite quarterback play to win a title. Ohio State certainly didn't have it in 2014 or in 2002 when they won it, right? I mean, Craig Krenzel and old Cardale. I mean,
right?
Yeah.
Right. Who started the last 3 games of the season, which is, it helps, but CJ Stroud is the antithesis of that, right? Like, God, that guy, like looking back, and like if CJ Stroud is on this team, I think they're a 75-point favorite against Akron.
Oh yeah, I
mean, I think they're minus. They're minus. The money line to win the national championship if C.J. Stroud's the quarterback.
Yeah, no, and I think that would push them clearly as the clear number one, rather than a 1A or 1B to Georgia. I think a quarterback like C.J. Stroud would push them over the top to make them a clear number one. So if we're thinking about defense, and that's I think is going to be what really defines this team is the defense. I mean, most of the returning talent of those draft-eligible Buckeyes came back on the defensive side of the ball. How does the 2024 team measure up defensively to some of these other great teams? I immediately go back to the 1998 team. because I think of those 6 teams, 98, 2006, 2015, 2010, 2020, and 2022, the 98 team was clearly far and away the best defensive team of that group. And I think the 2024 squad compares favorably to 1998 in a lot of areas, especially in the secondary. And I might even argue that the 2024 team has a better defensive line than the 98 team. The 98 team was great on the back end, right? At linebacker with Katzenmoyer and Diggs and those guys, Rodzinski, and then the great secondary. They had a solid defensive line, but I think this 2024 defensive line is much better than that 98 team. So where do you think this team measures up defensively compared to these teams, PBH?
I mean, comparably, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even the 2015 team, I mean, frick, you got Joey Bosa on that team.
That's
right?
true.
I mean, one guy can, just, wreck a whole offensive game plan.
Yeah.
And do I think JTT or Sawyer are at that caliber? No. Or even Chase Young, right? Or Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa. But yeah, personally, I mean, top to bottom, I mean, like the secondary, that whole our second, oh my God, dude. Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, Jordan Hancock, right?
Yeah.
Like Jermaine Matthews, right? Like, oh my God, that guy's a 5-star stud, and it's like, it's going to be hard for him to even see the playing field.
Well, yeah. I heard Doug Lesmerises say recently, and I mentioned this on the last pod, that he believes the Ohio State defense is 22 deep this year because of players like Jermaine Matthews and, Jackson and, Caden Curry and some of these guys they have in the 2 deep that are waiting for their opportunity. I think the 2024 team has an opportunity to be better defensively than 1998. I think they're clearly better than 2006. The 2006 defense was okay. I mean, they had Laurinaitis and Malcolm Jenkins, so they gave up a lot of points and yards in some games that season. Pardon me. 2015, I think it has an opportunity to be better than the 2015 defense. 2010 was a very good defense. It was kind of a no-name defense. Not a lot of names pop out at you except for Cam Hayward, who's still playing in the NFL. That guy is just a machine. And clearly 2024 is better than the 2020 and 2022 defenses by a mile. So I think this team has the goods defensively, no question about it, to be a national championship team, I think. For sure.
Unequivocal. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Any other comparisons you want to make here, PVH?
No, I'm just, I love summer, and it's almost going to be June 1st, and then we do this podcast, and you make me want to get the fall right away. And I'm just like,
I know.
No, not quite yet, right? But I think the point of that whole exercise is that we're both, every Ohio State, like the expectations are through the roof this year.
Yeah, they're a level up from the usual expectations, I think. And every 7 or 8 years you see this. There's one Ohio State team where it's set up, right?
Yeah.
With returning talent, a favorable schedule. You had circumstances outside of the program breaking their way. We mentioned them earlier. Jim Harbaugh's gone. Nick Saban is no longer standing in the way on the national stage. Right. So you have a lot of things breaking. No more divisions in the Big Ten. So if they do happen to slip up right in conference play, they're not going to be held out of the Big Ten title game. So a lot of things breaking their way. And then, of course, I also think this is a motivated team. This is a team that has unfinished business, which I think is really, really helpful, right, in terms of motivation. Because we've seen talented teams of the ones that I've just listed kind of go through the motions and not be as motivated as they should have been. The 2015 team or the 2003 team, right? This team is no shortage of motivation either. Now, the one thing that gives me pause about expectation, and it's okay, just have the expectations, lean into them. But, it's hard to win national championships. And, Ohio State has yet to deliver a national championship as a preseason AP top 2 in the modern era. All 10 of those teams I mentioned and the 6 that we narrowed in on didn't get it done. The 2006 and 2020 teams, I guess, were the closest to do it, but they suffered blowout losses in the title game. Funny enough, Ohio State's last 2 national title winning teams were under the radar teams that really weren't burdened by national title expectations. The 2002 team was a preseason number 13 in the AP poll. And by that, the program's usual standards, those are really super low expectations. 2015, they were preseason number 5, but if you remember, Braxton Miller had the shoulder injury in fall camp, and that shifted everybody's expectations for that team. And then, of course, they had that terrible loss to Virginia Tech at home in week 2, and everyone had that team dead and buried after week 2. So if the 2024 Buckeyes can deliver on, what I think are legitimate preseason national title expectations, they're going to be the first team to do it in our lifetimes, which I just think is pretty crazy. It just illustrates how tough it is to win a national championship. And it is interesting because while qualifying for the playoff now is easier, with the expansion to 12 teams, it means the path once you get in is more difficult because you have to win at least one extra game against a fellow national power or a real high quality team. And if you don't get that first round bye, it's 2 extra games. So
right.
It's hard, man. It's just like all the ingredients are there.
Well, we don't know. Dude, you don't know. It's unprecedented, right? It's the first year of a 12-team playoff.
Yeah.
Is there a Big Ten championship game?
There is. They've eliminated divisions, but they've kept the championship game, and they're just going to take the top 2 teams, right off the top.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and, the other thing, and you talk about the team and lean into it, the other big thing is Day, right? I mean, he's got to be feeling it, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
How do you coach through this? And that's why I think having Chip Kelly,
huge,
on the sideline in his ear, clearly somebody that's been there, done that, but also
that he trusts,
that he trusts.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you could be the most competent guy in the world, but there's got to be some points where you're just like, I don't know what to do here.
Yeah.
I could go this way or that way. And if you got a guy like Chip Kelly working with you in that situation, there's got to be a huge – and, it just kind of popped in my head, and I kind of always poo-pooed it, but I never understood why they had Kevin Wilson,
Yeah.
But, having somebody that's been a head coach, right, that maybe Day trusts – and because let's just be honest, like Day has that gunslinger mentality. He's going for it, the utmost confidence, but he's made some question in big moments, right?
Yeah.
You're like, dude, I don't know about that. Whereas, obviously experience matters, but also having Chip Kelly there is going to be invaluable, probably in some critical moments way down the road that we can't even foresee it.
I heard Colin Cowherd say that he thinks Chip Kelly is going to be worth like one big win for them this year. Just his, and you also weigh the history there between Kelly and Day, right? I mean, Kelly was Day's head coach at New Hampshire. He hired Day as an assistant when they were in San Francisco. So there's a real bond there. There's real trust there. It's not, you remember, initially it was going to be Bill O'Brien, right? He was going to be the OC and quarterbacks coach before he left to take the BC head coaching job. Kelly steps in, and he is the perfect guy to be this kind of conciliary and also, the other adult in the room in these critical moments to help Ryan Day out. So it really is. Man, one more tie back to the 1998 team, because you mentioned Ryan Day. There is a parallel between Day and Cooper, and you've actually made that parallel before on this pod. Now, Cooper in 1998, I mean, I think the fan base had a lot more justification to be impatient with him because he had lost a lot more to Michigan by that stage in his career. But, I mean, Ryan Day, he has a developing Michigan problem that he has to solve this year. So that's another parallel I'll make to 1998, an embattled head coach who's got a bit of a Michigan problem this year. So, oh, man, it's exciting. Yeah. All the ingredients are there. It's going to be fun. I think if there's a team that could live up to the expectations, that has all the ingredients that you need, maturity, experience, talent, it would be this team. We'll see if they can pull it off. All right, buddy.
100%.
Before I let you go, I want to get your take on the quarterback situation. First, and it seemed that you were as surprised as I was that all 5 scholarship quarterbacks remain on the roster after the spring. Howard, Brown, Keenholz, Sane, and Nolan are all still here. I'm stunned with that outcome. What do you think?
Makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry, but Brown and
Keenholz, yeah.
At least, like, dude, go play. You're not going to play.
Yeah.
Right. And you referenced it earlier, right? Like, well, actually, it was before we started the pod. Like, is there a quarterback, not controversy, but like
competition?
I think it's, that's pretty obvious who the
Yeah. What do you think? No, is it because we're being led to believe there's going to be one this fall? I don't think so. What do you think?
No, there's Justin saying he ain't no Terrell Pryor.
Yeah, Julian saying, yeah.
Or
yep.
Julian, whatever. Yeah, but right. I mean, that's about the only guy that I could fathom. Right. He's not starting game one. This is Howard's job to lose. Clearly, I think Day needs to set that precedent. And then here's the good news: you're going to have 4 games to figure it out.
Yeah.
If Howard isn't your guy or Sayan is your guy, but even that I don't see it. And not that he doesn't need to be CJ Stroud. He just needs to be with all the other weapons and defense like you talked about. Just don't lose the game.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not saying he's not going to be good. I have no idea. I have no earthly clue. But you don't have to be CJ Stroud, to get us to where we want to go.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think there's a quarterback controversy.
No, I agree.
Howard's.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what's being discussed is Howard versus Brown. And, and I mentioned this on the last pod, there is a gulf of experience and production between those two quarterbacks. I mean, Howard has over 1,800 career snaps. Brown has 104. Howard has 778 career pass attempts. Brown has 28. Howard's accounted for 67 career touchdowns. Brown has 3. I mean, let's not overthink this. Howard's the guy. He's the starter. And unless, God forbid, there are injuries, he's your guy, in my opinion.
And I don't even give that even an ounce of credence, and no, I don't know anything about football, but there is the eye test, and Brown has had a few chances, right? Like, he's not the guy. Like, he's not the highest state caliber quarterback. Yeah. He's just not, and and like you lie, like your great line, it's like, he's supposed to be this dual threat. No, he's not. He wasn't even good enough to beat out Kyle McCord.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start there. So in my mind, right, and who knows, but they're saying this freshman might be great. That, to me, if there is a controversy or if there is a guy that could challenge Howard for the job, it's him. It is not Brown.
Yeah.
It's not Brown. Like you laughed on our text, like, if he's not the starting quarterback at Utah, and he's still not, like, dude, what are you waiting for? Just go. You're not going to play at Ohio State. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I'm surprised that he stuck around. I thought between him or Keenholz, one of the two would have, gone into the spring portal window.
I could see Keenholz sticking around because he's so young. But not Brown, dude. We've seen it.
Yeah.
We've seen it. It's I'm sorry, man. It's life in the big city.
Yeah. Yeah, I think actually, I would not be surprised if he's QB3, a month into the season, right? And is surpassed by
4.
Sayan.
He could be behind Aaron Nolan. He could be.
Yeah,
I mean that guy must have some stones that, I was kind of surprised he stayed, right?
Who Nolan?
Yeah, Aaron Nolan.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean like, we don't talk about the fact that kid from Alabama was the number 1 overall recruit, and like he came after Aaron Nolan, stuck by Ohio State, and it, I'm like, even that surprised me. Like, oh my God, dude, I just go play at Clemson because they're going to need a quarterback. Clearly.
No, I mean, he fell in Ryan Day's lap. I mean, really, he just, I mean, again, we talk about another luxury item. Sayan fell in their lap. He had a really good spring by all accounts. I mean, the coaching staff was talking him up. The Ohio State beat was talking him up. They say he's the best natural passer on the roster. He's just a true freshman. I think he's going to push Brown to be the backup. I mean, if there's any intrigue, if there's any drama in the quarterback room this offseason, I don't think it's going to be at the top. I think it's going to be the battle for the backup spot. I would not count out Julian Sayan as the backup to Devin Brown. That's kind of where I think the drama is going to be.
Yeah, and again, I've never seen Howard throw a ball, so, he probably doesn't have to be great. But if he stumbles at all, to me, that's the guy that's probably coming in. It's not going to be Brown. It's just not.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing that. Yeah, I mean, I have admittedly not watched a lot of Howard either, but, the guy has a major conference championship under his belt, 1,800 career snaps, 67 career touchdowns. If you account for sack yardage, he has over 1,100 yards rushing as a quarterback. I think he has several. I think I looked at his. He's a big dude. He's like 6'6". if you look at his, I did a quick, view of his stats, and I think he's got 2 70-yard touchdown runs and 1 80-yard touchdown run in his career. So he can get in the open field and actually do some things. I don't think he's like super quick and shifty. He's no Braxton Miller in terms of like, shiftiness. But once he gets ahead of steam, that guy can move. And for the type of offense, I think Ohio State's going to want to run with a guy in Chip Kelly who has a proven track record of putting together elite rushing offenses. You've got Judkins and Trey Henderson in the backfield. This is going to be a run-heavy team, I think. And I think, Howard's the perfect trigger man for that. All right, buddy. Listen, I think unless you got anything else to say, I think it was a pretty good effort for the offseason, my friend. Not bad at all. We're still getting our sea legs back. Why don't we end things there for our listeners? At some point in the coming weeks, Paige and I are going to be back with you to do a breakdown of the 2024 schedule. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and visit our website at southstandsosu.com.